tell you point blank, I have not 1 ounce of remorse for TereseAnn's death. It could have all been prevented. All you had to do is let me see my kid. Now you're never going to see her again.
I've never, ever seen anybody like you. I hope, really, I never ever see anybody like you again.
In chilling courtroom footage that resurfaced recently, convicted murderer Randall Moore is shown expressing no remorse for the brutal kidnapping and murder of his ex-wife, TereseAnn Lynch Moore. The crime, which took place in 2009, shocked the community and left many grappling with the horror of such an act. TereseAnn, a loving mother and valued member of her community, had been trying to rebuild her life after a tumultuous relationship with Randall, but her attempts to break free were met with devastating consequences. The relationship between Randall and TereseAnn had been marked by intense volatility and conflict. The two had met years earlier and initially seemed to have a loving bond. However, over time, Randall became increasingly controlling and abusive, leading TereseAnn to seek a way out of the marriage. After years of suffering, she finally found the strength to file for divorce and reclaim her independence. This decision, however, enraged Randall, who viewed her move as a personal betrayal rather than a reasonable response to the abuse she had endured. According to reports from friends and family, TereseAnn had expressed fear for her safety in the months leading up to her death. Randall had been harassing her, refusing to accept the end of their relationship. He would often show up unannounced at her home and workplace, send threatening messages, and try to manipulate their children into siding with him. Though TereseAnn sought legal protection, including restraining orders, Randall's behavior escalated. It became clear that he was not willing to let her go, and the court's interventions seemed to have little impact on his obsessive and dangerous behavior. In 2009, the situation reached a tragic climax. Randall abducted TereseAnn from her home, violently overpowering her and forcing her into his car. He drove her to a secluded area where he brutally murdered her. The exact details of the murder were so graphic that even seasoned investigators were deeply disturbed by what they found. Randall left her body in a remote location, attempting to hide the evidence of his crime. However, thanks to the diligent work of law enforcement, Randall was quickly apprehended and charged with kidnapping and murder. During the trial, Randall's demeanor was cold and calculating. He showed little emotion as the prosecution laid out the horrific details of the crime. TereseAnn's family and friends who had gathered in the courtroom were devastated by the lack of remorse he exhibited. For them, it was not only the loss of a loved one that caused immense pain, but also the indifference and cruelty displayed by the man responsible for her death. In a particularly disturbing moment during the trial, Randall was asked by the prosecution if he felt any remorse for what he had done. His response sent chills through the courtroom. "No, I don't feel any remorse," he said, his voice emotionless and matter-of-fact. The lack of empathy or regret in his words was a stark reminder of the kind of man he was. A man who could take the life of someone he once claimed to love without a second thought. The courtroom, filled with those who knew and loved TereseAnn, was stunned into silence. Many had hoped, perhaps naively, that Randall would at least express some semblance of guilt or shame for his actions. But instead, he seemed to revel in the control he still had over the situation, even though he was the one on trial. For him, the power came from knowing he had taken TereseAnn's life, and in that moment, it became clear that any hope for redemption or contrition was futile. TereseAnn's family spoke out during the victim impact statements, sharing the profound grief and anger they felt over her murder. Her sister, with tears streaming down her face, described TereseAnn as a kind and loving person who had been taken from them too soon. She spoke about the deep void left in their lives and how difficult it had been to explain to TereseAnn's children why their mother was no longer with them. Other family members echoed her sentiments, calling Randall a monster and demanding justice for the senseless killing of their beloved TereseAnn. The judge, clearly moved by the victim impact statements and disgusted by Randall's lack of remorse, sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In his remarks, the judge noted that Randall's complete absence of remorse was one of the most chilling aspects of the case. "Your refusal to express even a shred of regret for what you have done is deeply disturbing," the judge said. "You have shown yourself to be a danger to society, and you will spend the rest of your life in prison for your heinous crime." Despite the conviction and sentencing, TereseAnn's family continues to struggle with their grief. Though Randall is behind bars, the emotional wounds from the tragedy remain fresh. Her children, now growing up without their mother, have had to navigate life in the shadow of such a violent and senseless act. The community, too, remains shaken by the crime, with many still haunted by the knowledge that a person they knew could commit such an atrocity. In the years since the trial, TereseAnn's family has worked to honor her memory by raising awareness about domestic violence and advocating for stronger protections for victims. They hope that by sharing her story, they can help prevent other families from enduring the same kind of heartbreak and loss. For them, the fight for justice did not end with Randall's conviction. It continues as they work to create a world where people like TereseAnn can leave abusive relationships without fearing for their lives.